So this is Love, chapter 23. Her heart thundering in her ears, Cinderella dashed across the royal gardens, making for the servants' quarters. Even when Drizella and Anastasia's shouts had faded, she didn't stop. Follow the clock tower north, Louisa had instructed her, then make a left at the purple tulips. Cinderella trained her eyes up at the clock, its iron hands ticking minutes past midnight. By the time she reached the purple tulips, she was out of breath, her lungs tight with exhaustion. The entrance to Blooms and Looms was just ahead, the sentries she'd encountered when she first arrived still standing guard. Look, it's the new girl, trying to get back before Madame Ermina does the curfew check? Yes, he chuckled. You're a bit late for that, I think. Luckily, you're not the only one who's sneaked out. Cinderella's eyes widened. Did Louisa? Got off the warning from Ermina hours ago. She's gone home already. Oh, relief swept her. Don't worry, said the guard kindly. Ermina won't discharge you for going to the ball. If she did that, she'd not have a soul left working for her. But I would expect a stiff talking to in the morning. Cinderella offered him a faint smile. Shuffling into her room, she took off her borrowed dress and flung it over her chair. Then, burying her face in her hands, she collapsed onto the bed. The moment she'd heard her stepsisters, her first instinct had been to run away. But should she have stayed? She could have explained things to him before dashing off, or at least told him her name. It doesn't matter. It's best he doesn't find out who I am. A maid in his own home. And why not? She countered herself. Am I afraid he'd never want to see me again? Cinderella shook her head, hardly able to believe that she was wrestling against her own feelings. No, I'm not, because he isn't like that. She clenched her fists, remembering how he hadn't recognized her when she'd worn her palace uniform. A cord of bitterness knotted in her throat. Sooner or later, he would find out who she was. For all she knew, her stepsisters had recognized her and told him already. Would Charles have her dismissed from the palace if he knew the truth? Would he ever want to see her again? Lady Tremain's words rang in her head over and over. An orphan and a servant. Who would want you? She gritted her teeth at the memory. Knowing her stepmother, she'd tell the prince that Cinderella was a thief and a liar, a troublemaker who deserved to be sent away for good. No one's come for me, she reasoned, curling up against the wall tiredly. Her hands went up to her neck, clutching her mother's beads. They didn't see me. They only saw the prince. Uncertain what tomorrow would bring, she finally closed her eyes, drifting along the edges of the dreams until sleep finally claimed her. Get up, cried Madame Ermina, rapping on her door. Cinderella sprang up from her bed. The green beads rattled over her chest, and she quickly stuffed them into her pocket before greeting Louisa's aunt. Ermina scowled at her. Amelia is taken ill, so we need an extra serving girl at breakfast this morning. That means you, Cinderella. Cinderella's gaze flew up. Me? Serve the royal family breakfast? I couldn't. The Duchess is waiting for me. Well, you'll have to deal with 2 shifts, won't you? Ermina said, crossing her arms. And for not being in bed by curfew, I have a list of extra tasks for you after breakfast. Now hurry up and change. I expect you in the main hall in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, harried footsteps pattered outside her door, followed by another knock. I'm the worst friend, Louisa cried. One of the valets last night told us Madame Ermina was about to do her curfew check. I couldn't find you. Cinderella swallowed. This wasn't the time or place to tell her about the prince. Already her head was throbbing with panic over what she'd do when she had to serve him breakfast. I'll keep my head down, she said, inhaling, and I'll hide behind the other girls if I have to. He won't see me. Cinderella, said Louisa, are you listening? It's all right, she assured her friend quickly. I can handle the extra work. Together, they assembled the main hall, along with a dozen other girls who'd stolen out of the ball. One by one, Madame Ermina doled out the punishments. When at last she reached Cinderella, her mouth thinned into a tight, disappointed line. When I set rules, I expect them to be followed. That goes especially for new hires such as yourself. Here I was, starting to think there might be some hope for you. Cinderella felt heat rush to her cheeks. The bells chimed for the serving maids to get to work, and Madame Ermina threw an apron and Amelia's orange sash at her, then pushed a tray into Cinderella's arms. Once you finish serving breakfast, report here immediately for the rest of your extra tasks. The dress is in my room, whispered Cinderella to Louisa as she tied on the orange sash. I'll bring it to you after I'm finished with breakfast service. Follow me. Madame Ermina grabbed her by the sleeve, dragging her toward the kitchen. She motioned at a large tray sitting on one of the shelves, heavy with jams, a porcelain teapot, teacups, pastries, and silverware, all meticulously arranged. Bring that into the royal hall, said Ermina, and for the love of God, don't drop it. Cinderella was more than up to the task at least. Years of balancing trays, one in each hand for her stepsisters, and one on her head for her stepmother, made short work of one platter. She picked it up easily and wove into the line of servants carrying breakfast into the royal dining hall. Keep your eyes down, she warned herself, but it was impossible to follow her own advice. The first thing she did when she entered the dining room was to search for the prince. Her eyes picked him out easily. He sat to his father's right, his fingers clutching the thin handle of his teacup, though he wasn't drinking. Seeing him, her stomach flipped. She couldn't face him again. Not so soon without after the masquerade the night before. What would she tell him? How would she explain her running away for the second time? Worse yet, how would he react upon learning that she was a servant in the palace, in front of his father and the Grand Duke? Fighting the urge to duck behind a column, she fell slightly out of sync with the other servants processing into the hall. She hurried forward to catch up, and her mother's beads clattered in her pocket. She'd forgotten to leave them in her room. No chance of doing that now, it was too late. Besides, she had other things to worry about. Chin up, she reminded herself. Maybe he won't recognize her in her uniform. After all, he didn't the first time. Just serve the food quickly, then leave. The king sat at the head of the table. To his right was the prince, and to the left was the Grand Duke, tying a napkin around his neck in preparations for his meal. The Princess of Lourdes was the most distraught, the Duke was saying. Most distraught indeed. She was an honorable guest of Aurelius. Imagine my mortification when I brought her to be introduced to the prince, only to find out it was his attendant. Charles, what have you to say for yourself? Said King George sternly. When the prince did not reply, Ferdinand threw his hands up in the air. Sire, this is a national embarrassment. It'll be the doom. She was there, interrupted Charles finally. She? The maiden with the glass slipper? Ferdinand raised an eyebrow. Well, why didn't you say so? Where is she now? Charles stared up at his cup of tea. She got away again, didn't she? A rather peculiar young lady. I said so before. I'll say it again to remind you, Your Highness. A girl like that is unfit to be a princess. I won't have you slandering her, cut in the prince. You don't know her. No one knows her, Your Highness, returned the Duke smugly. So, Cinderella thought with a quiet breath, he isn't angry. He's still looking for me. The king was quiet during the exchange. As Cinderella approached them with her breakfast, he reached over to the fruit bowl for an orange. The Duke shifted the bowl closer to the king. Let me help you with that, sire. Oh, thank you. Charles frowned. You seem preoccupied, father. The king cleared his throat, but his voice still came out thick and hoarse. I'm starting to think Ferdinand might have a point. His expression became melancholy, thick white eyebrows folding downward. I'm not going to be here forever, my boy. I want to see you happy before I go. Father, please. No more looking for this girl. This afternoon we'll meet to discuss your betrothal to the Princess of Lourdes. Cinderella swallowed and focused on setting the bread basket on the table, along with the accompanying jars of strawberry jam and orange marmalade and dish of butter, all as quickly as she could. Her last task was to serve the tea, and she could finally leave. Keeping her head down, she leaned forward to fetch His Majesty's cup so she could fill it. As she bent, her green beads slipped out of her apron pocket and fell into the pot of tea on her tray with a resounding splash. Cinderella froze. An apology tumbled out of her mouth, but the words were incomprehensible even to her. As she regained her senses, she reached for a napkin to dry the king's setting, but Madame Ermina, coming out of nowhere, beat her to it. Ermina batted her away, deftly inserting herself to clean the mess Cinderella had made. Cinderella, she admonished, and then went on, My deepest apologies, Your Majesty. This girl is new and rather clumsy. If the king replied, Cinderella couldn't hear it. She backed behind a marble column, hoping the prince was too busy listening to the Grand Duke's speech about the Princess of Lourdes's effervescent beauty and incomparable grace to pay any attention to her. The seconds stretched, but before long, Madame Ermina had cleared the royal table and the entire incident appeared forgotten. What are you gaping at? Madame Ermina whispered harshly as she passed Cinderella on her way out of the dining room. Get back in the kitchen. The necklace. Cinderella didn't see it, or the king's teapot, on Madame Ermina's tray. It was my mother's. You can get it later. Shoving Cinderella behind her, Ermina grumbled. Now, hurry up now. You're making a scene. It's already bad enough that you've disrupted His Majesty's breakfast." Cinderella didn't hear the rest of what Louisa's aunt said. The entire time she told herself not to look at the prince. But in a moment of weakness on her way out, she glanced at him to find him staring at her, his mouth agape. She darted her eyes away, rushing out. She could only guess what he was thinking. How she wished the earth would swallow her whole. She heaved a sigh of relief once she made it back to the kitchen. A silver platter with a steaming pot of tea and a slim vase of fresh orchids awaited her. The Duchess would take her breakfast in the chambers. Cinderella fetched the tray and hurried on her way. She had scarcely made it out of the kitchen when her eyes widened in shock. There he was, Prince Charles, asking one of the servant girls where she was. She started to turn away, but the prince was too fast. He caught the edge of her sleeve and gently touched her arm. "Stay, Cinderella, please stay." "You know my name? Madame Ermina spoke it when you dropped this." He lifted her mother's necklace into view, unwrapping it from an ivory napkin. "Into my father's tea." A sheepish grin spread across his face. "I was in such a rush to catch you, I didn't get a chance to clean it properly. It should be dry, but it might still smell like raspberries and lemons. This morning's tisane." He bowed slightly, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Cinderella." She blushed, drawing her hand away and retrieving her mother's necklace. The beads were still warm from the tea, and she flinched, remembering how astonished Charles had been to see her serving him and his father at breakfast. "You should go back. They'll be missing you." "What's the matter?" I'm not a princess, Your Highness," she blurted, "or a lady. I'm just—" "The girl I've been waiting for my entire life," said Charles. "First, please don't call me Your Highness." "But it's Charles, just Charles." Cinderella sucked in her breath. "I mean, Charles." Charles, the name settled on her tongue, and Cinderella's cheeks warmed. How easy it was to call him by his name, and what a difference it made. "Cinderella," he said, smiling. "Equal in step, equal in heart, for always." "That's beautiful." "It was my parents' promise to each other, and now mine to you, if you'll have me." "If you'll have me?" Cinderella could hardly believe it. The prince was asking her to be his bride. His bride! She tried to find any trace of uncertainty in his eyes, but all she saw was warmth and sweet promise. It certainly did not look as though he were being forced to ask for her hand. Happiness bloomed inside her, warming her from head to toe. Being with him, that ache of loneliness she had suffered for so many years would ease away. She'd have a new family, a new home. Still, she hesitated. It was one thing to hope for someone who'd love her. For years, she had closed herself off from the idea of a new family in order to protect herself. But now that her chance had come, Cinderella wrestled with it, with all of it. Marrying the prince meant she'd become a princess. She wouldn't just join any family. It'd be the royal family. She'd spent so much of her life pretending in her father's chateau that she was content to be her stepmother's servant, that she could live the rest of her life there and be happy simply dreaming and wishing. Even at the ball, she'd pretended to be someone she wasn't. Would she be pretending again if she married Charles, pretending to be a princess? "People wouldn't accept me as your new bride," she whispered. "They'll accept you if I tell them to." He took a deep breath. "Trust me." "I do, but—" She lingered on her words, wondering how she'd tell him about her fairy godmother and how she had come to the first ball, wondering how she could explain the confusion and uncertainty nodding inside her now. "But I think I need some time." She took his hand, covering it with hers. "It isn't a no, Charles, but I've only just left my home. There's so much I'm still learning, and there's someone, a friend, who needs my help." Her voice drifted. She wanted to ask him about Lenore and whether he could help bring magic back to Aurelius, but she wasn't sure how to put it into words. "I understand," said the prince. If she disappointed him, he hit it well. "Take a few days. Take as much time as you need. In the meantime, I'll ask my aunt to release you from your duties." "No, don't do that." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't want your aunt to know just yet," she explained. "I'll tell her when I'm ready. Besides, if I leave, Madame Ermina will have to send a new girl to attend her. Your aunt wasn't pleased that she'll have to train yet another attendant, and all the servants will have to draw straws." "Then I will not speak to her." Charles looked down at their clasped hands. "But while you're making up your mind about me, may I come find you? I want to get to know you better, and you to know me." His eyes wavered, so hopeful Cinderella couldn't help hiding a smile back. "All right, but what is it?" he asked. The prince was close enough that she could see the stray crumbs of his breakfast still on his lips and a smudge of marmalade on the side of his mouth. Holding up the corner of her apron, she dabbed his lips. It wouldn't do for a prince to return to breakfast with jam on his face, she said, wiping away the marmalade. The tips of her fingers accidentally brushed against the bend of his lips, and a shiver raced down her spine. She darted her fingers away, forgetting she was holding her apron. Its folds landed over Charles's chest, and she instinctively reached out to fix it. But as her hand hovered just over the prince's heart, so close she could feel his pulse beating unsteadily against her fingertips, she flattened her palm against his chest. And, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she brought her mouth to his. It was a kiss even sweeter than their first, and Cinderella was glad she had set down her tray, for she surely would have dropped it this time. She stood on her toes, gently pushing Charles a hair's breadth away so she could whisper, "This isn't a dream, is it? You here with me, that we found each other? The sound of my heart in my ears would have woken me up by now if it were." Charles kissed her fingertips, holding them close to him. "I thought it was you. The time in the portrait gallery, when I saw you wearing Aunt Genevieve's sash. I should have known. I should have found you then." Cinderella held her breath. "You'll never have to worry about finding me ever again," she said softly, quoting him. "I promise." They kissed again, but in their exhilaration, she and the prince made one mistake. Neither of them saw the Grand Duke hiding in the opposite corner, taking in every word of their romantic interlude.